He bought the most beautiful Apache slave woman, and the next day, she was his wife. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty frontier town, casting long golden streaks across the wooden buildings that lined the main street. It was a quiet time before the market came alive and the townsfolk began their daily routines. James walked slowly along the boardwalk, his boots crunching on the dry, uneven planks. He was a trader by profession, known among the townspeople for being fair, honest, and unusually thoughtful for someone living on the edge of the untamed territory. Despite his reputation, there was an emptiness in his life that no amount of trade or profit could fill. He often wondered if there was something, or someone, meant for him beyond the everyday bustle of the town. James had lived near the Apache territory for many years, and he knew the risks and realities of frontier life. Stories of raids, captures, and fierce battles were not uncommon, yet he had always respected the Apache people for their courage and close connection to the land. He had heard countless stories from traders and travelers about the harsh lives of captives, about families torn apart, and the struggles of those forced into servitude. But he had also heard of moments of kindness, courage, and surprising friendships that crossed the boundaries of culture and circumstance. It was in this uncertain and often dangerous world that James's story was about to take an unexpected turn. That morning, James's attention was drawn to an unusual gathering near the market square. A small group of townspeople had clustered around a wagon, murmuring in hushed tones. Curious, he approached and saw that the wagon was filled with captives, men, women, and children, who had been brought in from the surrounding territories. Their faces were a mixture of fear, confusion, and quiet strength. Among them, one figure stood out immediately. She was a young Apache woman, striking in both appearance and demeanor. Her dark hair fell in long, straight strands around her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and alert, seemed to hold a depth of intelligence and emotion that went far beyond her years. There was something in the way she carried herself that set her apart from the others, a dignity and calmness that spoke of inner strength. James could not look away. He felt a strange mix of admiration, curiosity, and a desire to protect. He knew that in a world like theirs, where human life was often treated as a commodity, the choices he made could change everything for someone. The townsfolk whispered about her, calling her the most beautiful Apache girl, but James saw more than beauty. He saw a person who deserved respect, someone whose story had only just begun to be written. As he watched, he realized that the captives were being sold in the market like objects, their fates determined by the highest bidder. Some of the townspeople seemed indifferent, while others exchanged quiet words of sympathy, though few acted on them. James felt a tug at his heart. He understood that he had the means to intervene, that he could step forward and ensure that this young woman would not be subjected to a harsher fate. But he also knew that his decision would not be simple. To purchase a captive was to take on responsibilities, to navigate social judgments, and to confront the complicated realities of a world where freedom and captivity were fragile concepts. Despite the complexity, James made his choice. He approached the merchant and offered what he believed was a fair price, not for selfish gain but to secure the woman's safety. There was a moment of tense negotiation, then the transaction was complete. The wagon driver nodded, and the townsfolk murmured in surprise. Some praised his courage, while others whispered about the unusual nature of his actions. For James, the important thing was not the opinions of others, but the knowledge that he had acted with intention and care. The young woman, whose name he would soon learn was Nayeli, looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She had been through much in her life already, and she had learned to be cautious. Her eyes studied him carefully, searching for signs of deceit or cruelty. James met her gaze steadily, showing patience and respect. He did not speak of ownership or control, but rather of concern and safety. He understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and he was prepared to earn it, one small step at a time. As they left the market square together, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the town. The streets began to fill with merchants, traders, and townsfolk going about their daily business. The sounds of horses, carts, and distant laughter created a lively backdrop, but James's focus remained on Nayeli. He noticed the way she moved, graceful yet guarded, and he wondered about the life she had led before arriving in this town. Her silence was not emptiness but contemplation, and he recognized the strength it took to remain composed in such circumstances. For his part, James felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. This was no longer just another day on the frontier. It was a moment that could shape the future for both of them. He thought about the challenges ahead, the cultural differences, the judgments of the townspeople, and the emotional journey they would both undertake. But he also felt a quiet hope. There was a possibility, however small, that respect, understanding, and perhaps even friendship could grow from this unlikely beginning. As they walked toward his home, James and Nayeli exchanged few words, yet each glance, each gesture carried meaning. He offered her food and water, gestures of basic care, and she accepted them with a subtle nod. There was an unspoken agreement that they would proceed cautiously, learning about one another and finding common ground. In that quiet morning, amidst the routine bustle of frontier life, a connection began to form, fragile, tentative, but real. James reflected on the complexity of life on the frontier. It was a place of freedom and danger, of opportunity and loss. Every day brought decisions that could alter lives irrevocably. In choosing to intervene on behalf of Nayeli, he had made a choice that was both risky and deeply human. He had acted not out of obligation, but out of recognition of her dignity and worth. This was not simply a transaction. It was the beginning of a story shaped by courage, respect, and the possibility of something extraordinary emerging from ordinary circumstances. By the time they reached James's modest home, the sun was high in the sky, bathing the wooden walls and surrounding landscape in warm light. The town hummed with activity, yet within the small space of the home, there was a quiet, almost sacred sense of calm. James showed Nayeli to a simple room, modest but clean, where she could rest and regain her strength. He gave her space, understanding that this was not just a physical relocation but an emotional transition as well. She had been uprooted from everything familiar, and he wanted to honor her experience and feelings. As the day wore on, James and Nayeli began to talk, not in long speeches, but in short, deliberate exchanges. He asked about her family, her experiences, and her life before captivity. She shared pieces of her story cautiously, revealing her intelligence, resourcefulness, and resilience. James listened with genuine interest, never interrupting or imposing his own narrative. It was a rare conversation for both of them, a meeting of minds as well as hearts. In that exchange, they discovered the first threads of understanding, a foundation that could support trust and perhaps even friendship in the days to come. By evening, as the town settled into the quiet rhythm that follows a long day of activity, James felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had known. He had acted with intention, courage, and compassion, and in return, he had found a spark of connection with someone extraordinary. Nayeli, for her part, had begun to see that not all people in this world were harsh or self-serving. There was room for kindness, respect, and mutual understanding, even in the harsh realities of frontier life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, James and Nayeli shared a simple meal together. It was not lavish, but it was prepared with care. They laughed softly over small observations, each smile a bridge between two worlds. In that moment, the possibilities of what could come next felt endless, even if uncertain. The day had started as ordinary, marked by the routines of frontier life, but it had become extraordinary, a turning point that would shape the lives of both James and Naeli in ways neither could yet fully understand. The night drew on, quiet except for the distant sounds of the town settling into sleep. James reflected on the events of the day, on the courage it took to act according to one's conscience, and on the subtle power of human connection. Naeli rested in the room he had prepared, her mind full of questions, memories, and cautious hope. Both of them, in their own ways, understood that life had changed forever, and that the choices they made next could define not only their own futures, but also the story they would write together. In that simple frontier town, under the vast expanse of the evening sky, a new chapter had begun. It was a chapter of respect, courage, and the possibility of something extraordinary born from ordinary circumstances. And although the road ahead would be challenging, filled with uncertainty and difficult decisions, both James and Naeli felt, in the quiet moments before sleep, that perhaps they had found in each other the beginning of something rare and profoundly meaningful. The morning after. Their first quiet evening together arrived with a gentle breeze that carried the scents of the frontier, dusty earth, fresh hay, and distant wildflowers. James awoke early, as was his habit, and looked around his modest home. The day promised to be warm and bright, but his thoughts were already on Naeli. He wondered what she was thinking, what memories weighed on her mind, and how she had slept after the uncertainty and fear of the past days. There was no easy way to bridge the gap between their worlds, yet he felt determined to act with patience, respect, and understanding. Naeli, for her part, had spent the night reflecting on the strange turn of events. One day she had been a captive, uncertain of her future. The next, she found herself in the home of a man she barely knew, someone who had purchased her for protection rather than profit. It was bewildering, to say the least. Yet beneath her caution, a quiet curiosity had begun to grow. James had treated her with a dignity that many of the townsfolk had failed to show. He had offered her food, water, and a safe place to rest, but more importantly, he had listened. In his eyes, she did not see ownership or condescension, only concern and a desire to understand. By mid-morning, James decided it was time to take a step that might feel unusual, yet necessary for both of them. He offered Naeli a walk outside, suggesting that the fresh air and the sun might help her feel more at ease. She accepted, moving gracefully beside him, her posture cautious yet calm. As they walked along the edge of town, James pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his life as a trader. He spoke not to impress her, but to invite her into his world, to offer her a glimpse of life beyond the boundaries of fear and captivity. Naeli listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about his work and the town. Her voice was soft but confident, reflecting an intelligence and curiosity that intrigued James. He noticed how she observed everything, the way her eyes lingered on the distant hills, how she studied the animals grazing nearby, the subtle expressions that crossed her face. There was a depth to her attention, a sharpness that indicated she had survived through observation and careful thought. It impressed him, and he silently resolved to honor her insight rather than underestimate it. As they walked, James also noticed how Naeli reacted to the townsfolk. Some looked at them with curiosity, others with disapproval. Children stared openly, pointing and whispering among themselves. A few adults cast judgmental glances, clearly not accustomed to seeing a young Apache woman treated with respect rather than suspicion. Yet Naeli remained composed, never letting the glances or whispers disturb her. She seemed to have learned long ago that strength was often quiet and composed, and she carried herself with a dignity that commanded attention without demanding it. At one point, they came to a small clearing by a stream, where the water flowed gently over smooth stones. James suggested they rest there for a while. He had brought some bread and dried fruit from his home, offering it to Naeli. She accepted, breaking off small pieces slowly, as if savoring the act as much as the food. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, listening to the sounds of nature, the birds, the rustling of leaves, and the soft trickle of the stream. In this simple moment, there was a sense of peace, a small oasis in the midst of uncertainty. After a while, James began to speak again, gently probing to understand her experiences without pressing too hard. He asked about her family, her childhood, and the community she had grown up in. Naomi spoke cautiously at first, sharing fragments of stories that hinted at both joy and hardship. She described the landscapes of her homeland, the traditions she valued, and the lessons she had learned from her family. Each story revealed resilience, intelligence, and a deep sense of identity that James could not help but admire. He realized that she had endured much, yet she remained unbroken, a testament to her inner strength. As their conversation continued, James shared more about himself, but with a careful balance. He did not want to overwhelm her or dominate the dialogue. Instead, he spoke of his experiences as a trader, of the people he had met, and the challenges he had faced living on the frontier. He described the loneliness that often accompanied life in such a place, and how he had come to understand the value of trust and companionship. Naomi listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. It was clear that both of them were discovering new dimensions of the other, building a bridge of understanding one careful step at a time. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and the shadows grew shorter, yet neither seemed in a hurry to return to the town. There was an unspoken agreement that the walk and the conversation were as much about learning to feel safe and respected as they were about anything else. James noticed small signs that Naomi was beginning to relax, a smile that appeared when he mentioned a humorous incident from his travels, a lightness in her step, and a willingness to respond openly rather than guardedly. For James, each small sign was a victory, proof that trust could grow even in unexpected circumstances. As they approached a cluster of wildflowers, Naomi paused and knelt to touch the petals, examining their delicate colors and textures. James watched quietly, realizing that this small act reflected her careful attention to the world around her. She had survived by observing and understanding, and even now, in a moment of relative safety, she continued to engage with life fully. It was a reminder that every person carries a world within them, and that understanding that world required patience, curiosity, and respect. Eventually, they returned to James's home, the late afternoon casting warm light through the windows. The town was quieter now, as the bustle of the day had slowed. James offered Naomi a place to sit and rest once more, and she complied, her posture relaxed yet alert. He could see that her mind was busy, processing everything that had happened, everything she had seen, and everything she was beginning to feel. There was a complexity to her thoughts, a mixture of caution, curiosity, and perhaps a small, budding sense of hope. As evening approached, James prepared a simple meal. He did not rush her, allowing her to observe and participate if she wished. Naomi accepted portions of the meal, her demeanor polite and respectful, yet also expressing a growing comfort in his presence. They shared quiet conversation, each story and observation another step toward understanding. There was laughter too, gentle and soft, arising from small, everyday observations. In these moments, the barriers of fear and unfamiliarity began to soften, replaced by a cautious companionship. Night fell, and the first stars appeared in the sky, bright and distant. James and Naomi sat together, speaking in low tones about their experiences, their thoughts, and their dreams for the future. It was a conversation that required patience, for both were still learning the language and expectations of the other. Yet it was real, and it was meaningful. In that quiet evening, a foundation of trust and mutual respect began to take shape, fragile but promising. James reflected on the unusual nature of the day. A man in the frontier, living alone, rarely experienced such a direct human connection so quickly. Yet he knew that this bond, however tentative, could shape the future in profound ways. Nayeli, in turn, recognized that not all people acted from self-interest or cruelty. Here was a man who had acted with intention and care, who treated her as a human being rather than property. That realization, small as it might seem, was powerful, and it planted the seeds of trust that could grow in time. Before resting for the night, James took a moment to look out the window at the quiet town below. He understood that the days ahead would bring challenges, cultural differences, skepticism from others, and the personal growth that came from forging a connection across boundaries. But he also felt a quiet optimism. In choosing to act with compassion and respect, he had created an opportunity for something extraordinary. Nayeli had survived much, and he had witnessed her strength firsthand. Together, they were beginning a journey that neither could have predicted, yet both could shape with intention and care. The night was calm, filled only with the sounds of the frontier, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the gentle wind, and the faint murmur of the town settling into sleep. In the quiet, James and Nayeli rested in separate rooms, yet the events of the day had drawn them closer in ways neither had fully articulated. The journey of trust, understanding, and connection had begun, laying the groundwork for what might come next. The world outside remained unpredictable, but within this small home, a small miracle was quietly unfolding. Two lives, shaped by courage and respect, beginning to intertwine in unexpected and meaningful ways. The days following their first shared moments passed with a mixture of quiet routines and small, significant gestures. James continued his work as a trader, tending to the goods, meeting townsfolk, and traveling short distances to nearby settlements. Nayeli accompanied him at times, observing his work and the ways of the town, slowly learning the rhythms of a life so different from her own. For her, every day was a lesson in observation and adaptation. She had survived through careful attention to the world around her, and now she applied those same skills to understand this new environment, this new life that James had offered. Despite the growing connection between them, the reality of their situation soon became apparent. Trust, once tentatively formed, required more than shared meals and gentle conversation. It demanded action, patience, and understanding across cultural boundaries that neither could fully erase. Nayeli struggled at times with the presence of townspeople who looked at her with suspicion or outright hostility. Some whispered behind her back, some stared openly, and a few avoided her entirely. James noticed the way her shoulders stiffened, the subtle tension in her posture, and the quiet, controlled way she moved. He realized that the world beyond his home was not yet a safe or welcoming place for her. One afternoon, while returning from the market, a small group of townsfolk approached James and Nayeli. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and disapproval. "You don't need to be spending so much time with her," one man said, his tone edged with suspicion. "She's different. You should be careful." James met the man's gaze steadily, speaking calmly but firmly. "She is a human being," he said. "I treat her with respect because she deserves it, not because of what anyone else thinks." Nayeli observed this exchange silently, noting both the courage in his words and the conviction in his tone. For her, it was a rare reassurance that she had chosen wisely in trusting him. Even as they navigated these social challenges, internal struggles also began to surface. Nayeli grappled with memories of her past, her family, the people she had been separated from, and the life she had known. She wondered if she could ever truly feel at home in a place so unfamiliar, among people who often seemed indifferent or unkind. James, meanwhile, faced his own doubts. He worried that his actions, though well-intentioned, might not be enough to protect her from the judgments and prejudices of the town. He wondered if he was truly capable of guiding them both through the challenges that lay ahead. Despite these difficulties, small victories emerged. Naeli began to participate in daily tasks, learning how to prepare meals in the modest kitchen, tend to the small garden outside, and manage the routines of a frontier home. James observed her patience, intelligence, and skill with admiration. She approached each task with care and thoughtfulness, never rushing but always attentive to the details. In these moments, their bond strengthened, built not only on conversation but also on shared labor and mutual respect. Each day, they learned more about one another, finding ways to bridge the differences between their worlds. The challenges they faced were not only social but also emotional. Naeli, having been a captive, struggled with feelings of uncertainty and fear. At times, she would retreat into silence, her thoughts consumed by memories of hardship and loss. James recognized these moments as critical and did not press her for conversation or explanation. Instead, he offered presence and patience, understanding that true trust could not be forced. Over time, Naeli began to speak again, sharing fragments of her past, her hopes, and even her fears. Each word was a step forward, a small acknowledgement that she was beginning to trust him fully. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, a storm approached from the distant hills. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. James and Naeli worked together to secure the small garden and gather firewood, moving efficiently in the fading light. The storm, while brief, created a shared challenge that required cooperation and trust. As they worked side by side, there was a quiet sense of partnership that neither had experienced before. The storm passed, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air and a feeling of accomplishment that was quietly celebrated between them. In the weeks that followed, James decided to introduce Naeli more fully to the town. He wanted her to see that not all people would treat her with suspicion, and that some could offer friendship and understanding. They visited a few merchants, exchanging greetings and learning the subtle rules of social interaction in this new community. Naeli's natural intelligence and calm demeanor impressed some townsfolk, while others remained skeptical. James encouraged her to continue observing, learning, and choosing carefully whom to trust. Slowly, a few friendships began to form, small yet meaningful connections that provided a sense of community. However, not all encounters were positive. One afternoon, while passing near the town square, a group of children laughed and pointed at Naeli, repeating phrases they had heard from their parents. Naeli's first instinct was to withdraw, but James gently took her hand and guided her past the group, speaking softly. "Ignore them," he said. "They do not understand, but we will show them what respect looks like." It was a lesson in patience and dignity, and Naeli absorbed it quietly. She realized that courage was not always about confrontation. Sometimes it was about maintaining composure and moving forward despite ignorance and prejudice. The growing bond between James and Naeli was not without its moments of joy and lightness. They found time to share small pleasures, a walk through the hills surrounding the town, an evening by the stream listening to the water, and quiet conversations under the stars. These moments, though brief, were deeply significant. They allowed both of them to experience companionship, laughter, and the beginnings of emotional intimacy. Naeli began to see that her life could contain safety, respect, and even happiness, despite the hardships she had endured. James, in turn, felt a sense of fulfillment and connection he had never known. Yet, even in these moments of progress, the realities of the world they lived in remained. Frontier life was unpredictable and often harsh, with challenges that could arrive without warning. James and Naeli both understood that they could not rely solely on goodwill or trust. They would need resilience, courage, and careful planning to navigate the days ahead. They discussed strategies for safety, ways to handle judgmental townsfolk, and how to support each other emotionally. These conversations, though practical, also deepened their emotional connection. They were learning not just to coexist, but to thrive together in an environment that was often unforgiving. One morning, news arrived that a group of traders had encountered trouble near the Apache territory. Some had been caught in a skirmish, while others were detained for questioning. James listened to the news with concern, understanding that the dangers of the region could affect anyone at any time. Naomi observed his worry and instinctively grasped the seriousness of the situation. It was a reminder that their world was fragile, that life on the frontier demanded vigilance and awareness. Yet, rather than fear, the news sparked a sense of solidarity between them. They realized that facing challenges together, supporting one another through uncertainty, was a powerful form of connection. Over time, Nayeli began to share more of her own knowledge with James. She spoke of survival skills, understanding of the land, and insights into human behavior that she had learned from her community. James listened intently, recognizing the value of her perspective and experience. These lessons were not only practical, but also deepened his appreciation for her intelligence and resilience. He began to see her not merely as someone he had helped, but as an equal partner, someone whose wisdom and insight could guide them both in navigating the complexities of life on the frontier. Despite the growing trust and partnership, moments of tension and doubt still appeared. Naomi sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice in trusting James, while he occasionally questioned whether he could truly protect her from the judgment and dangers surrounding them. Yet each time a challenge arose, they faced it together, learning to rely on each other's strengths. The struggles became part of the rhythm of their growing relationship, a series of small tests that reinforced their bond. Evenings became a time for reflection and quiet conversation. They spoke of hopes for the future, sharing dreams of a life built on respect, understanding, and companionship. They laughed softly at minor misadventures, found comfort in shared silence, and grew increasingly aware of the emotional bond forming between them. The initial trust, once tentative and fragile, had begun to mature into something more substantial. They were learning that life on the frontier, though harsh and unpredictable, could also be filled with connection, support, and even love. As Part 3 drew to a close, it was clear that James and Naomi's lives had entered a new phase. The initial trust had blossomed into a deeper understanding, shaped by daily routines, shared challenges, and moments of quiet joy. They had learned to navigate the judgments of others, to face external dangers together, and to support one another emotionally. Each day brought new lessons, both practical and personal, and each challenge reinforced the strength of their connection. In the quiet of the evening, as the stars appeared above the frontier town, James and Naomi sat together, reflecting on the journey so far. They understood that struggles and challenges would continue to arise, yet they also recognized that they could face these obstacles together. The foundation of trust, respect, and partnership they had built was strong enough to withstand the uncertainties of frontier life. And in that quiet, shared understanding, both felt a sense of hope and anticipation for the days to come. Time passed quietly in the frontier town, but beneath the calm, life's unpredictability was never far away. James and Naomi had grown closer, their bond strengthened by days of shared labor, conversation, and small victories. Yet the world outside their home remained complex, full of uncertainty, judgment, and occasional danger. Even with trust between them, the realities of frontier life soon presented a challenge neither of them had expected. One early morning, the town awoke to the sound of shouting and hurried footsteps. News had arrived that a group of travelers had been attacked near the outskirts of the territory. Horses had been stolen, goods lost, and people injured. The town, already tense from previous reports of skirmishes, became restless. Rumors spread quickly, some exaggerated, some grounded in truth, and fear began to settle like a heavy fog over the streets. James felt an immediate surge of concern, not only for the traders and townspeople, but also for Naeli. The frontier had always been dangerous, but now the danger seemed closer, more urgent. Naeli noticed the tension in James's demeanor. She had come to recognize the subtle changes in his behavior, the furrowed brow, the tightened jaw, the quickened pace of his movements. She understood that he was trying to protect not only himself but her as well. She admired his determination, but it also made her uneasy. The world they were living in could change in an instant, and despite their growing partnership, they were still vulnerable. Naeli, who had endured hardship before, now confronted the fear of losing control over her own life once again. Over the next few days, the tension in town grew. Traders spoke in hushed voices, children were kept close to their parents, and whispers of danger circulated in every corner. Some townsfolk expressed concern over James's relationship with Naeli, suggesting that it might invite trouble or unrest. Though James had learned to ignore much of the gossip, this time he felt the weight of responsibility more keenly. He was not only responsible for his own safety but also for hers. Naeli, perceptive as ever, sensed the burden he carried and wished she could do more to ease it. The first true test of their partnership came unexpectedly. A small group of men arrived at James's home, seeking guidance and support. One of their horses had gone missing near the area where Naeli had once been held captive. The men feared further attacks and wanted James's experience and knowledge to help track the missing animals. James agreed, knowing that he could not avoid responsibility, but he also realized that this decision would expose both him and Naeli to potential risk. Naeli insisted on accompanying him, not out of defiance but because she wanted to contribute her knowledge of the land and the signs of danger. The journey was tense from the start. The wind swept across the open plains, carrying dust and the distant calls of birds. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement a possible threat. Naeli, drawing on her experience and intuition, guided James and the men through safe paths and points of observation. Her knowledge of the terrain was invaluable, and James was grateful not only for her skill but for her courage. Yet even with their careful planning, the risk remained. Frontier life was never predictable, and each step could hold danger. One afternoon, as they neared a small canyon, they discovered signs of a recent struggle. Broken branches, trampled grass, and a faint trail of footprints indicated that someone had passed through recently, possibly fleeing from danger. The men grew tense, whispering their concerns. Naeli knelt to examine the trail more closely, her sharp eyes noticing details that others overlooked. She pointed out the direction in which the travelers had likely moved, estimating their path with remarkable accuracy. James was impressed by her calm and decisive approach, yet he also felt the pressure mounting. They were close to discovering the source of the disturbance, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on all of them. As evening approached, they set up a small camp near a stream, taking care to remain hidden from possible threats. The men gathered wood and prepared a simple meal, but the atmosphere was tense and quiet. Naeli sat beside James, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think they will be safe?" she asked softly, referring to the travelers. James looked at her, recognizing the concern in her voice. "I hope so," he replied. "We are doing everything we can. We must stay calm and focused." Naeli nodded, absorbing his words, but inside she wrestled with a mixture of fear and determination. She had survived so much already, and now she faced the possibility of new danger, this time in a world she was just beginning to understand. Night fell and the camp was cloaked in darkness. Stars twinkled above, indifferent to the fears and struggles below. James and Naeli took turns keeping watch, listening to every rustle of wind, every snap of a twig, and every distant sound. Hours passed slowly, each moment filled with tension. At one point, a distant howl echoed across the plains, sending a shiver down their spines. Naomi gripped James's hand briefly, not out of weakness but as a gesture of solidarity. Together they faced the night, drawing strength from their connection and the knowledge that they were not alone. The following morning brought both relief and new challenges. The travelers were found, mostly unharmed, though shaken by the events of the past days. Their gratitude toward James and Naomi was sincere, but it also highlighted the reality of frontier life. Uncertainty, danger, and the need for resilience were constant companions. As they returned to town, James reflected on the journey. He realized that danger was not only external, it could also test emotional bonds, trust, and personal courage. Naomi had proven her strength and intelligence, reinforcing the growing partnership between them. Yet the emotional weight of the journey began to take its toll. Naomi, exhausted from the physical and mental strain, struggled with recurring memories of her past captivity. These memories resurfaced unbidden, bringing feelings of fear, sadness, and anger. She had thought she was ready to leave the past behind, but the journey reminded her of how fragile security could be. James noticed the changes in her mood, the quiet moments of reflection, the sudden hesitations, and the rare expressions of frustration. He understood that she needed more than safety. She needed reassurance, patience, and understanding as she processed the trauma of her past. A few days later, a misunderstanding in town escalated unexpectedly. One of the townsfolk accused Naomi of wrongdoing, fueled by rumors and prejudice. Though the accusation was baseless, it spread quickly, stirring unease among neighbors. Naomi felt the weight of judgment keenly, recalling past experiences where people had assumed the worst of her. James, aware of her growing anxiety, stepped forward to defend her calmly and firmly, speaking to the townsfolk about fairness, respect, and truth. The confrontation was stressful, leaving both James and Naomi drained. It was a stark reminder that, even in a community that offered safety, prejudice and misunderstanding could still strike unexpectedly. In the days that followed, Naomi withdrew somewhat, needing time to process the events and regain her sense of balance. James respected her need for space, yet he also made sure to offer reassurance through quiet gestures, preparing meals, tending the home, and providing small comforts that reminded her she was not alone. They spoke little at first, allowing silence to act as a bridge, a shared understanding that words were not always necessary. Over time, Naomi began to re-engage, her resilience shining through once more. She realized that while the world could be harsh, there were also safe places and people who could offer support, respect, and care. The experience left both of them changed. They had faced external danger, social judgment, and emotional strain, and yet they had endured. The trials had tested their bond, revealing both strengths and vulnerabilities. James recognized that leadership, protection, and patience were ongoing responsibilities, not occasional acts. Naomi understood that trust required time, courage, and a willingness to confront fear. Together, they had navigated challenges that could have easily driven them apart, but instead, these struggles deepened their connection and reinforced their commitment to one another. One quiet evening, after a long day of tending the home and sharing small tasks, James and Naomi sat by the stream near their home. The water reflected the colors of the sunset, and the world seemed calm for a moment, offering a sense of peace after the weeks of tension. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, of the fears that had emerged, and of the resilience they had discovered within themselves and in each other. Their conversation was honest, reflective, and heartfelt, acknowledging the hardships while also celebrating the strength of their partnership. As the night grew darker, James realized that the journey ahead would not always be easy. Frontier life, with its unpredictability and dangers, would continue to challenge them both. Yet he also knew that the bond they had formed, built on trust, respect, courage, and understanding, was strong enough to endure these challenges. Nayeli, for her part, recognized that safety, connection, and a sense of belonging were possible, even in a world that had often been harsh and unforgiving. In that quiet moment, they understood that life's struggles were not only tests of survival, but also tests of character and partnership. They had faced fear, danger, and judgment, and yet they had emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of their own resilience. The challenges they had faced were the lowest moments, the times when the fragility of trust and safety had been most apparent. And yet, by confronting these trials together, they had discovered the depth of their bond, the power of shared courage, and the beginnings of something lasting. The weeks that followed the difficult events in town were filled with quiet determination and renewed purpose. James and Nayeli had endured external threats, social judgment, and emotional strain, yet their bond had grown stronger through the trials. They understood now more than ever that life on the frontier was unpredictable, but they also realized that trust, courage, and partnership could transform even the harshest circumstances into something meaningful. Each day, they learned more about one another, discovering new strengths, shared joys, and ways to support each other. James continued his work as a trader, tending to his goods and making trips to nearby settlements. Nayeli accompanied him when possible, not merely as an observer but as an active participant. She had grown more confident in navigating the rhythms of the town and the surrounding wilderness. Her intelligence, resourcefulness, and keen sense of awareness made her an invaluable partner. People who had once regarded her with suspicion began to notice her skill and poise, and slowly, a few more townsfolk started treating her with respect. The small victories, though subtle, gave both James and Nayeli a sense of hope and progress. One day, while organizing goods at the market, James noticed a group of townsfolk watching him and Nayeli closely. Unlike the whispers and glances of earlier days, this time there was curiosity mixed with cautious admiration. Nayeli handled herself with calm confidence, speaking politely, observing carefully, and responding thoughtfully. James watched with quiet pride, realizing that she had transformed not only through circumstance, but also through her own resilience and determination. Their partnership had become visible to others, a quiet example of mutual respect and understanding across differences. Despite these small successes, both James and Nayeli were aware that trust and acceptance could be fragile. They continued to face subtle challenges, occasional judgment, misunderstandings, and reminders of the world beyond their home. Yet each time they encountered an obstacle, they confronted it together. If a neighbor expressed doubt, they responded with patience and clarity. If uncertainty arose on the frontier, they approached it with preparation and calm. Through these actions, they reinforced their connection and strengthened the sense of safety and belonging that had begun to grow. Over time, their home became a place of warmth, stability, and shared responsibility. Nayeli contributed not only through physical labor but also through her insights, offering advice on practical matters and sharing her knowledge of the land. James, in turn, demonstrated patience, kindness, and unwavering support. The two of them had developed a rhythm, a quiet understanding that allowed each to thrive while respecting the boundaries and experiences of the other. Life, though still unpredictable, had become more manageable because they faced it together. As the seasons changed, James decided it was time to take a step that had been quietly forming in his heart. He realized that his feelings for Nayeli had deepened beyond friendship or partnership. He admired her courage, intelligence, and resilience, and he felt a growing sense of love and commitment. He also understood that she had survived much and deserved a choice that reflected her autonomy and dignity. The decision he made was not impulsive but grounded in respect, care, and a desire to offer a future built on equality and mutual understanding. One evening, under the glow of the setting sun, James spoke to Nayeli about his intentions. He expressed his admiration and deep respect for her, explaining that he wished to honor her not only as a partner in daily life, but as someone whose presence and guidance he valued deeply. He asked if she would consider formalizing their partnership through marriage, emphasizing that the choice was entirely hers. Nayeli listened carefully, absorbing both his words and the sincerity in his tone. She felt a mixture of surprise, contemplation, and quiet joy. Here was a man who had proven himself trustworthy, who had treated her with dignity and respect, and who now offered a future that honored her as an equal. After reflecting on the journey they had shared, the dangers, the challenges, and the moments of joy, Nayeli accepted James's proposal. The decision was not made lightly. It was a recognition of trust, understanding, and a desire to continue facing life together as partners. That evening, they celebrated quietly, sharing a simple meal and talking long into the night. There was laughter, reflection, and a sense of accomplishment in knowing that they had arrived at a decision built on mutual respect and affection rather than circumstance alone. Their marriage, though initially modest and private, became a symbol of partnership and cooperation for the town. A few townsfolk, who had previously regarded Nayeli with suspicion, began to acknowledge the depth of their bond and the care with which they treated each other. Children who had once whispered and pointed now observed with quiet curiosity, learning that respect, patience, and understanding could bridge differences. James and Nayeli's union became a living example of trust and courage, demonstrating that connection and compassion could thrive even in challenging environments. Life together was not without its challenges, but the foundation they had built allowed them to navigate difficulties with grace and resilience. James continued to trade and manage his business, with Nayeli contributing her knowledge and skills. They maintained the routines that had grounded them during earlier struggles, while also making space for shared moments of joy, learning, and reflection. Their days were filled with practical tasks, quiet companionship, and ongoing growth, each day reinforcing the sense of stability, trust, and partnership that had taken so long to develop. Nayeli, in particular, began to flourish. She discovered new strengths in herself, both practical and emotional, and took pride in the life they were building together. She continued to reflect on her past experiences, but no longer with the same intensity of fear or uncertainty. Instead, she found a sense of empowerment in knowing that she had choices, that she was valued, and that she could contribute meaningfully to the world around her. James, in turn, admired her resilience and insight, recognizing that her presence enriched his own life in countless ways. As months turned into years, the bond between James and Nayeli deepened further. Their life together became a blend of shared responsibilities, companionship, and mutual respect. They faced challenges, yes, but they faced them together, relying on the strength of their connection and the lessons learned from past struggles. The frontier remained unpredictable, but within the walls of their home and the rhythms of their shared life, they had built something lasting, meaningful, and beautiful. Neighbors came to see them not just as individuals, but as a pair who had navigated hardship with grace and courage. Nayeli's knowledge of the land and people became valued by others in the town, while James's experience as a trader continued to provide stability. Together, they offered an example of how two people from different worlds could build a life rooted in trust, respect, and care. Their home became a place where others could witness the possibilities of cooperation, understanding, and compassion in action. In quiet moments, James and Nayeli would sit by the stream near their home or walk through the hills surrounding the town. They reflected on the journey that had brought them together, the moments of fear, uncertainty, and challenge, as well as the small joys, shared victories, and deepening trust. They recognized that their story was not defined by ease or fortune, but by resilience, respect, and the conscious choice to face life together. Each day reinforced their understanding that love, partnership, and connection were not automatic, but cultivated through patience, care, and intentional action. Eventually, James and Nayeli began to think of the future in broader terms. They spoke quietly of the possibility of building a family, of creating a home that would reflect both of their values, and of leaving a legacy of respect and cooperation for others in the town. These conversations were measured, thoughtful, and filled with hope. They understood that life would always include challenges, but they also knew that the bond they had cultivated gave them the strength to face whatever came next. Through all the struggles, fears, and uncertainties, James and Nayeli had discovered something rare and enduring, a partnership rooted in equality, trust, and genuine affection. The trials they had endured had tested them, but they had emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of the value of mutual respect. Their lives, once uncertain and filled with external pressures, had become intertwined in a way that brought meaning, joy, and purpose. As the sun set over the frontier town one evening, casting a warm golden glow across the wooden buildings and rolling hills, James and Nayeli sat together quietly. The world outside remained unpredictable, full of both beauty and danger, but within this shared space, they felt safe, understood, and valued. They reflected on how far they had come, from moments of fear and uncertainty to the creation of a life built on trust and connection. Their journey had been difficult, yet it had shaped a bond that could endure, adapt, and grow stronger with each passing day. In the end, James and Nayeli's story was one of courage, respect, and the power of human connection. It demonstrated that even in a world full of challenges, differences could be bridged, trust could be built, and lives could be transformed through patience, understanding, and genuine care. Their marriage, once a simple union, became a testament to the strength of partnership, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary possibilities that arise when two people choose to face life together with courage, compassion, and love. And so, in the quiet rhythms of frontier life, James and Nayeli continued their journey, not as two individuals bound by circumstance, but as partners bound by choice, respect, and a shared vision for a life filled with trust, growth, and enduring connection. The world remained unpredictable, but together they had found a way to thrive, to face challenges, and to build a future that honored both their pasts and the promise of the days yet to come.